Welcome to Everybody's MindWell Suite, where we share carefully curated content to support your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. I'm your host, Fran Bishop, President and CEO of Everybody's Inc. And in today's conversation, we're talking about something which is very eminent and on the minds of many people. You know, businesses across the country are starting to reopen their doors to employees and customers. And as responsible employers, we all want to make sure that we're doing so in a way that puts our best foot forward, but also respects and supports our employees in a healthy workplace experience. So today's topic is just about that. How are we going to reopen our doors in a way that's successful and really makes sense for everyone in terms of our structures? So we're going to be talking about best practices around that, some of the tools and resources that you can use, many of which are free and complimentary and are out in the domain that you can find, and many of which that we share from Everybody's and also from our speakers that are with us today. But before we get our conversation started, I want to hear from you. I want to hear, what's on your mind today? What is the biggest fear or concern that you may be thinking about when it comes to returning to the office and opening the office? And it may not be for you. You might be in a situation like many people that you can remain in working from home status, but many people cannot. So if there's people in your family, maybe network, even your kids, when it comes to returning to a normal routine, what's your biggest concern around that? If you can put that in the chat box, I'd love to hear back, and we could share that with our panelists today as they kind of share some of the points as well. But before we do that, and as you're putting that in, I'm going to share an interesting statistic with you. So our team is always curating content around the web and out in the hemisphere about what people are talking about, particularly as it relates to workplace balance and health and living. And there's an interesting article that's out now from Forbes magazine about building employee resilience during the pandemic. And they surveyed some of the world's largest industries across pharmaceuticals, finance, telecommunications, packaged goods, automotive, you name it. And the feedback was really, really interesting. It was actually very illuminating. Not overly surprising if you've been kind of keeping your ear to the floor, but many companies, many very large companies of 5,000 employees or larger are reporting that their employees have over 35% high anxiety. Another 29% are reporting that there's high stress that they're dealing with on a daily basis. And another 25% are reporting that their employees are actually feeling that they're just in a really grappling situation. So if that's the case with you and that's what you're saying, it's part of the norm. That's what everyone is talking about today. So let's see what the chat says, because I think that will serve as the basis of some of the conversation that we're hearing. One person said that they're concerned about the precautions that organizations are taking. Very, very nice. I think somebody else has said that they're concerned that people won't be wearing their masks all the time. So I think that's a really interesting point. So I have an aging parent, and once a week I go and visit her and take her around to various stores that she needs to get to. And the one thing I'm noticing is that some people are mask shaming you if you don't have your mask on, and other people are not wearing masks altogether. My mom wears 2 masks, so she's triple protecting herself, or she's double protecting herself. But that's a big concern today. What precautions are people taking, and how are they going to do that? Let's see. Someone else said, how do we make sure or ensure that the processes continue as they need to? I think that's a huge concern too. So that's kind of what some of the points are that we're going to be getting into today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest panelist that's going to be with us today that is speaking on this topic, and that is Sharon Lipinski. So Sharon is the founder and CEO of Habit Mastery, which is a consulting group around cognitive behavioral. She's also an instructor and speaker and TV personality. She's also an author. She's authored a book called 365 Ways to Generously Live and Simple Habits for a Life That's Good for You and for Others. A daily book that helps people create the habits that get them healthy in mind, body, and spirit. Interestingly enough, Sharon is also a founder of a nonprofit called Change Gains, which is into virtual giving circles. She's helped donate more than $100,000 to create and to really great charities around the world. And lastly, one of the ways that we connected is that she's actually the creator of Habit Mastery app, which actually helps individuals and organizations create better habits on an ongoing basis. And you'll find that that's an excellent resource that she can also talk about during our call that people are using today. So Sharon, welcome to the call.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So as we jump into this conversation, Sharon, one of the things that we've also noted that's kind of trending on the net is COVID-19 has forever changed our lives. There's one report by CNBC that meetings as we know them or as we used to know them, where we would fly to a meeting or get together for a meeting, a couple meetings a week in person, will be replaced eventually by email and IM. And for team members who no longer work together in a central office, that domain will now be more connected through virtual means or electronic means, but it will create a new level of trust for people who can't interact anymore. So it's a different level of intimacy. So for any coaches on the line or people who have, been in the coaching world, that's a great piece, right? Because trust is always an issue when it comes to building teams, cohesiveness and team building. But then we have a whole nother issue because now there's no longer that in-person connectedness. So as we think about that, Sharon, maybe one of the first things we can talk about, and maybe you can share with our listeners, is, how will we operate in this new domain in a healthy, productive way and create habits because when they feel harder to create now that we have this whole new domain and whole new way of living?
Yeah, well, we do have to create all new habits, and it does feel harder than it used to because it is harder than it used to. And statistically speaking, it's just hard to create a new habit to begin with. We know statistically about 92% of New Year's resolutions will fail. People will fail to create that habit. Now on top of something that is already hard to begin with, we are dealing with these really increased cognitive and emotional loads. So we're dealing with fear about getting sick, or dealing with a sick family member, or homeschooling, or worries about finances. And we can think of kind of our mental energy like a bank account. There's only so much in there. And when we're draining that tank account with these cognitive and emotional stressors, there's less energy and there's less focus left over for creating these new habits. So if it does feel harder than normal, that is true. It is harder than normal.
So kind of as a follow-up to that, how do people start to, I guess, reframe their brain or reframe their mindset when it comes to just creating just one little habit? Maybe that habit is around how they formulate or even think about meetings, for instance, or how they communicate.
So if you want to create a new habit, we kind of have to delve into a couple of things. We have to talk about what a habit actually is. And a habit is a neural pathway in the brain. And so we kind of tend to talk about habits kind of, commonly just as sort of this really casual thing, like, oh, I have a habit around doing this, but it's actually something that we can see happening inside the brain. If we're looking at your brain activity when you're doing something that you have to think about, it's going to require your prefrontal cortex. But when something is a habit, it's using an entirely different part of the brain, and the brain activity isn't active during that entire time. It's just the ones at the beginning and the neurons at the end of the action, and then the rest of that time you can be thinking about other things. So when we're talking about a habit, what we're really talking about is this tangible physical phenomenon inside our brain. And that's what we want to try and create. And the way you create a habit is through repetition. Repetition is the mother of habit. So what you're looking for when you want to create a new habit is, how can I keep repeating this new behavior over and over and over until, right, I've created these neural pathways in our brain. And so in order to do that, we teach our clients a number of strategies. One is really about understanding the anatomy of a habit. That every habit has three parts. There's an action, there's the trigger, there's the action, and then there's a reward. For example, checking my text messages is triggered by the sound the phone makes, and the reward is finding out what just happened. My morning cup of coffee is triggered by walking into the kitchen in the morning, and the reward is caffeine. So that's what you want to think about when you're trying to create these new habits, is you're looking for intentionally choosing these components in such a way that it sets you up for success, that you can repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until you've created that neural pathway in your brain.
Interesting. Now, I think that automatically begs the question, and I can almost hear clients of mine asking, okay, so in this new world or this new routine where home is work and work is home, right? School is home and home school is and home is school. What's the best habit, or is there any best habit to have, in this new environment that we're in, would you say?
So yes, and also probably it depends. So when we start working with companies to work on habits, we're looking for what I call foundational habits. These are the kind of certain behaviors that once you get those, they kind of influence the rest of your life, because these habits will start to create an identity. For example, exercise in the personal health realm is one of those foundational habits, because once you're exercising regularly, it starts to change your identity. Now I'm a person who takes care of myself, right? And that's going to impact what I eat and what I drink. Or, on the emotional side, some sort of meditation or stress management habit, because now I'm a person who does things to remain calm, and that's going to change how I interact with my family and my coworkers, right? So these are foundational habits, and they begin to kind of spread. When you're looking at working from home, what you're looking for is, what is that for me? Maybe it's a morning exercise. Maybe it's my to-do list at the end of the day. Find that one or two, behaviors that help you be more productive, and then really just focus in on that till you've got that one nailed.
Okay, interesting. All right, so again, we're talking about reopening doors and moving back into the workplace and establishing a habit with that. So as we think about that, what would you say would be the easiest way if for instance, that the habit is around not just wearing the mask, but remembering to take the mask with you? I mean, that's my issue. I can't tell you how many times I've left DC and gotten through the tunnel and onto the 14th Street Bridge. I forgot the mask. I've got to go back. And that's at least 3 minutes from my house. So, that's really annoying. And there's nowhere necessarily I can stop and buy a mask, right? So how do you then start to think about something simple like that, but it's very important? It's imperative nowadays.
Yeah. So you've identified like two different habits we need to work on, right? It's the one is just making sure I have my mask, and then the other is working on making sure that I actually wear it. And you do have to treat them differently. So the trigger for me, when I am leaving the house, I have a little hook by my door where I put my masks on, and my trigger is, as I'm leaving the door, I can grab my mask, right? So this is what we talked about, the trigger, the action, the reward. So you're looking for something that's going to launch a new behavior. So for me, it made sense to have the masks by the door because that was my reminder to take it. When it comes to wearing a mask, one of the triggers you might think about is other people's eyeballs. Like if I can see somebody else's eyeballs, that is my cue, that's my trigger that I need to be wearing my mask right now.
Oh, okay. That's good. That's good. Anything else we should think about when it comes to, when you think about the office environment? Is there anything that we can do specifically in the office to kind of reestablish a new norm in terms of developing the habit further?
Well, I think one thing that's really important when it comes to the office environment is that you spend some time thinking about the barriers that are in place for people to follow through on this behavior. So, you just identified one when you were talking about the mask habit, which is, well, I don't have it, right? So, there are a few different kinds of barriers you need to think about. You need to think first about physical barriers.
Okay.
If we're going to be saying, we need to maintain 6 feet social distance, then what are the barriers to actually following through on that? Where are people going to be walking and standing and queuing in line? Like, you need to think about all of the things that could keep people from following through on their good intentions. Think about logistical barriers, like what do people need? Where do they need it? You need to think about supply chain barriers, right? Just people can't wear a face mask if they don't have one. And then you really need to spend a lot of time thinking about cultural barriers, especially in the polarized time in which we live. The outside culture is going to be influencing how people feel about these coronavirus protection procedures. And so you want to be thinking, what is the culture we currently have in our office? How is it being impacted by what's going on in the larger culture? And then what do we need to do about that?
I think that's excellent because you've taken it from something that's individual or personal, and now you're showing how we can look at it in an enterprise standpoint, right, for our companies. And for those of you who are on the call, the takeaways for me is that, just like you would think about in your family structure, things that you need to interact with family or with outsiders, now that we're starting to notice that little by little states are starting to reopen, right? So what are you going to need to be able to have a 2 or 3 friends over or up to 10 friends over? Obviously, you want to make sure you have protective, the PPE equipment that you need. And you're making sure that you're doing the social distancing and all of that. So the same thing would translate now to the office, that the office has to have things in place. It was really interesting to me to see how quickly, I think the food industry reacted in terms of the grocery store. Almost a week later, they had the social distancing, in Target. I noticed they had the big circles. Many stores provided PPE. When I shop at Trader Joe's a lot, they had the sanitizer, they had the gloves for us. If you didn't have a mask, they had the masks, and then they made them mandatory and you had to bring your own. But it was very interesting to see that. So the same way that you're planning for at home, for those of you who are business leaders or managers or responsible for that, you need to be thinking about that the same way, the same PPE, and then think about your supply chain to get that. Interestingly enough, we got a call the day before yesterday from from a previous client that looks like they're going to be a client once again, because now they have to do temperature checks as people go into the offices, right? So the mechanism for us to do that as a company is we have temperature checkers that are at the airports or what have you. They stand there with this temperature check, and then if a person doesn't pass, and they go to tertiary, and they have a nurse's station there, and we deal with them there. Well, at home, your tertiary might be that you just take a temperature of your child or somebody in your house. If it's not serious symptoms, then they tell you just to go ahead and stay at home, right? And sequester yourself at home. So the same thing in the office environment. If you're doing those pre-checks and temperature checks at the office, then you can have a tertiary station where people are tested even further. Anything else that you would want to add to that, Sharon, when it comes to, I think, the office environment and creating new habits or new routines around that? And think about it from this standpoint. Many of the companies that we currently work with, the first thing they asked us to do is put together some sort of policy and procedures in terms of how we operate. So for those of you who don't know too much or new to Aero Bodies, we are, for the most part, a health management, facility management firm, but we do so much more than that under the umbrella. But one of the big things that we do is provide management overarchingly for fitness and wellness centers, right? But there's so many other little tentacles that fall under that. Policy and procedures is a big part of that. So Sharon, that question to you, or excuse me, Sharon, that question to you is, as companies are thinking about ensuring that their employees are now taking on these new habits in a totally new routine type of way, is there anything else that they need to be thinking about to establish this so that it becomes part of, again, that healthier workplace experience, as opposed to something, oh my gosh, this is what my boss is making me do, and so therefore I can't get my head around it. The mindset hasn't shifted.
Yeah, I think you want to put a very strong emphasis on your follow-up. So we talked already a little bit about like this increased cognitive emotional load that we're all dealing with. So even with the best of intentions, even if your employees absolutely want to follow all of your new policies and procedures all of the time, they're going to forget, and they're going to struggle. They might make an excuse, just not this one time. There's not enough people around for me to worry about it, whatever. We have to understand that employees are really going to struggle to follow through on that. So you need to keep thinking about your communication, the emails, the video messages from leaders, posters in the break room. You're like, where where are your employees gathering? How can you communicate with them in tiny little bite-sized pieces, continuously reminding them about all of these new things that we're doing? And it might feel a little bit like a broken record, but under this kind of stress, people are processing information differently. They're forgetting a lot more information, and we just have to um, keep being there with transparent, clear communications until people get an opportunity to build these neural pathways in their brain and really start to follow through on it more unconsciously. Right now, it's going to take a lot of effort for people.
That's excellent. I think that's a great segue into a little bit more of this conversation around supply chain and pieces with the supply chain. So face masks. So one of the articles we recently came upon was the fact that face masks are going to be the new fashion ready, orange is black kind of thing, right? The new wardrobe staple. But as you already mentioned, what we're finding increasingly is that people have them, but they don't always want to wear them. So full transparency on myself, I'll have it on, but it gets annoying, or it's not, the fibers start to itch me or something. And so I find myself constantly kind of pulling it up and down. So question to you, how do we ensure that our employees, are actually wearing the mask and find a way to make this new habit a real one that people want to do?
Yeah. So I actually have a whole webinar coming up on this next Friday because lots of people are having this problem. And one of the things, so we're going to be doing 3 things on this call. The first is we're going to be talking about the 6 reasons why people might fight that kind of guideline. And when you understand why people are kind of ignoring it or pushing back, it helps you start to develop the right tactics for combating it. We're going to talk, though, about 3 tactics that are probably happening unintentionally, but that can really trigger a lot more resistance to following these guidelines than to wearing face masks. And then 3 tactics that you can do instead. So we talked a little bit about this cultural barriers that are in place, and we're going to really dive deep into that because, when we have a lot of the conflicting messages that we are seeing today, and when we have a feeling that one side does this and the other side does that, you're dealing with a contentious issue in the office. And if you can't resolve it, you're going to be looking at a lot of, constant complaining and workplace conflicts. So we're going to dive into, how do you really combat some of that cultural barrier?
I'm trying to share the screen on that. Sharon, do you want to just share just a couple more pieces on that really quickly? I'm sharing the screen. Can you all see this now? And the link for it. But I don't want to wear my face mask. I love that. That's great. What to do when your employees ignore or push back on coronavirus safety. I think that's going to be a really hot topic and a really big issue going forward, don't you?
I do, and I'm just going to go ahead because I can't see it. I don't know if anybody else can. So I'm going to put the, oh, there it goes.
Okay, got it. Yeah, it's
perfect. Okay, so now you can see the
webinars now. So
okay, yeah, I was just going to put the link in the chat in case people wanted to click on that.
But you all can see the screen. Can you see the screen? Can everyone see that?
Okay, Sharon says yes.
Okay, great. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to share on that?
What else do I want to share on that? I'll also just say that these same strategies that we're going to be talking about really will help you influence your employees' behaviors in other areas too. Right now we're going to see a lot of conflict among, these polarized things like wearing a face mask. But, anytime that you have an employee, a change that you're asking your employees to make, these same kind of principles are going to help you influence your employees' behavior in that area too.
Okay, very good. And then just to let everyone know, at the end of the call, we're going to also be sharing some additional tools and resources that you all can use that are, again, kind of out and available for you right now around workflows, things like this in terms of supply chain, PPE, etc. So let's switch gears a little bit now. And I want to talk about the new trend in terms of just scheduling and workflow environment and office hour environment. Another study that we've noticed from the Boston group talked about the fact that a new trend is that the standard of the 9 to 5 office is quickly becoming a thing of the past. Have you seen this as well, Sharon, a little bit? People are working at all time hours of the day now as opposed to just the normal 9 to 5.
I think so. I
Yeah.
think so. And I don't know that it's a bad thing, though. Do you?
No, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I mean, I think with our team, we're noticing we have our team is like multi-generational, right? We go from Gen X, all the way to baby boomer. And it's fine as long as we can get it done. We do a lot of things for companies behind the scenes, for healthcare companies, for, industrial employers, for the government, whatever that's around the healthcare space. So as long as we get it done, they just want to make sure the work is done. But with that, I think that will create a new norm with regards to hours and with regards to meetings and just a mixed messaging. And I think somebody put a really interesting analogy out. I think I was on Twitter the other day, is that, now that there's not somebody in the office that the boss can go and tap and say, hey, can you come into my office and talk to, who is going to be the go-to? Because now the go-to has to happen electronically, right? So with all of that happening, how important is it to like our routines, would you say? If now it's not necessarily 9 to 5, but the office decides it's going to be 11 to 7, or it's somebody else on your team says, I want to work 3 to 9. So you can't necessarily reach them first thing in the morning. How important is it, would you say, Sharon, to actually like our routines or habits? And is it better to work on creating we'll get to that one next, but how important is it to like it?
Well, in the beginning, I think it's really important. But I'll say that we have a lot more influence than we think we do on whether or not we like something. So, we talked about the anatomy of a habit. We have the trigger, we have the action, we have the reward. We didn't really talk about that yet. What happens when you reward yourself is that chemicals are going to go off on your brain. Dopamine and endorphins and oxytocin, serotonin, right? All these things, and it feels good. And your brain will associate that good feeling with the last action you just took. So when you take this action, reward yourself, do your action, reward yourself, do your action, reward yourself, you start to develop an emotional and physical bond with this new behavior. And when you don't do it, there'll be like a little voice in the back of your head, and you're like, God, something doesn't feel right here. Something feels off, right? And it's like, hey, would you go do this? Because I'd like to have my reward, please. But we have a lot of control, or we have a lot of influence in triggering those hormones in our brains intentionally. So we have rewards that are physical, in that they move your body in a way that is fun and enjoyable to you. So not exercise. Exercise is not a reward, at least not for most people. But you can jump up and down, you can pump your fist in the air, you can clap your hands, snap your fingers, pretend you just shot a free throw, but you're doing something that feels good for your body. And if it puts a smile on your face, that's your cue. Bam, I've released hormones, right? Mm-hmm. Or they can cause a physical reaction in your body. And if you think about some of the habits that are most ingrained in your life, there are these habits that come with these built-in physical rewards. Smoking, drinking, caffeine, right? They're coming with these built-in rewards. So you can think about using that to your advantage in a healthy way, right? Maybe you drink some coffee afterwards, or you have a snack or lunch, right? For better or worse, food is always a reward. Or it can be an emotional reward, and these are things that just you personally find rewarding. So if you're a checklist sort of person, you put it on your checklist. You can look at a picture of your family. You can say something you're grateful for. You can have a mantra that you repeat. Just things that you personally find rewarding. Or rewards can be social in nature. And there's a reason why 1 billion people are logging into Facebook every day, right? We are addicted to social rewards. So if you do it, can you then spend 15 minutes on Facebook? Or if it's exercise that you're working on, can you use your Fitbit to check in with people or give somebody a high five? Or if you're doing something with a group of people, then have some sort of group mechanism where you're all contributing to that. And then once you start to build that neural pathway and it's starting to feel good, the reward and liking it is really no longer nearly as important, because the brain is just doing it because it's easier than not doing it. But in the beginning, if you can get yourself to enjoy it, it's going to be a lot easier.
That's great. That coincides with some research. So in another hat that I used to wear was as an executive coach. And we did a lot of work based on HBR, the Harvard Business Review, and some of the studies that they did in coaching. And one of the things I remember is one of the studies around, they called it the, it's not the cognitive athlete, but it's the, it'll come back to me. But it was really interesting. It was a study by Jim Lohr and Harold Swartz. And it talked about the fact that we can easily fool our brain. Like when it comes to affirmations, the brain doesn't know that it's you telling yourself this. It's information that it's receiving. So to your point about a routine or about, creating a new habit, the brain doesn't necessarily know that you don't like it or like it. It's just you're feeding your brain that information. So it makes sense from a cognitive standpoint how the brain could then interpret that. You do it, and then it just becomes, like you said, laden in the brain, and it becomes a pattern that continues to work, which begs the question, which is more important, the carrot or the egg? I mean, the chicken or the egg. So is it more important to create a good habit before we get rid of a bad habit, or is it better to break a bad habit before we create a good one?
Yeah, I love that question. It depends a little bit on how bad the habit is that we're talking about. But my first preference is usually to go with making a good habit first. And there's a few things that happen when you make a good habit. The first is you might just have less time for these bad habits in your life, so they're naturally going to fade out of your life. The second thing that happens is you start to, again, change your identity. I'm a person who exercises. I take care of myself. And so now, why am I still smoking? Right? This doesn't feel right. And that cognitive dissonance will start to lessen that bad habit's grip on you, and it makes it easier to break it. And not to mention, if you create certain good habits like exercise or like meditation, now you're giving yourself more physical and emotional resources that you can bring with you to getting rid of that bad habit. So again, it just, depends on how bad the habit is that we're talking about. But if I have a choice, I would go create a good habit first.
And you kind of mentioned this in your previous comment then. So how long does it actually take to create that good habit? And then how long would it take to break the old habit?
Yeah. Well, so the number that I hear most often is it takes 21 days to create a new habit, right? That's kind of, what we see on a lot of books, and that number has no basis in scientific fact at all. We don't even know where the number came from. They guess that it came from a book in the 50s where a doctor was talking about how long it takes patients to get used to their new look after plastic surgery.
Oh, God.
21 days. And then, here we are 50 years later, still repeating it. We don't really know how long it takes to create a new habit. We have one study out of the University College London. They followed 96 participants in creating a habit of their choosing. Mm-hmm. And they found that it took anywhere between 18 days and 254 days. Right, that is a huge difference. And so when we look at some of the factors, and usually when I talk, I just put it out to the audience, and the audience will guess it because it's pretty obvious, right? What are some of the factors here? Motivation. Why is it important to me? How committed am I really to doing this? How much pleasure we get from this action. And some things just feel better than others, and those are easier to create. Now, unfortunately, they usually are not good ones for us, but some things feel good. How much existing neural pathway we have around a particular behavior, and the older you are, the more neural pathway you have, for better and for worse. Frequency. Something that you're going to do every day or multiple times a day, way easier than something that's happening once a week or once a month. How much support? How well is the environment around you supporting you in this? How well are the people around you supporting in this? So those are some of the factors that can influence, are you on the short end of that, or are you on the long end of that behavior or that habit timeline?
Yeah, just from my personal work, I would say you're spot on. 25 years ago, I wore a trainer's hat. So that's how I started the company, which was as a personal trainer. And I do remember in our peak when, we were training probably 300 people a month. And I had a good load of clients myself. The one thing I always noticed, it was really interesting with women. I mean, I would say 80% of my clientele were women, professional business women, 35 to 55. And one of the things I noticed is that for the women, and these were real, some of these women had incredible careers, incredible responsibilities. One of my clients was, she had her own aviation company. Another woman was she was how do you explain it? She was responsible for a lot of the intel that happened at the Pentagon before they actually went in and went into a new country to find the bad guys, for lack of a better term. Just really, really powerful women, but they had a lot on their shoulders and very, very responsible, heavy responsibilities. And one of the things I remember is most of them hated exercise. They didn't detest it. They didn't kind of not like it. They hated it. The only thing they could do was pay me, because they were very devoted to their 401ks and not wasting money. And if they paid me, they knew they would show up. And they would tell me, honestly, I hate this, but I'll do it because you told me I have to do it. And one of the things I noticed, particularly with two clients, I remember one of the ladies who was the defense person I told you about, she was not a big salad eater, right? She did not like vegetables whatsoever. And I remember asking her one day, Jamie, I said, Jamie, what do you like when you put on your salad? And she says, well, I like lettuce and peas. And I am a big salad person. In the 80s and 90s when salad bars first came out, I just remember how it was like a smorgasbord, right? You could pick anything. I love salad bars. I love bars. Now it's true. Salad bars, but I love them because some really good salad bars, they would have like 25 ingredients. And I just thought to myself, peas and lettuce. And so the challenge to her was, I said, every 2 days, I want you to go to the salad bar and I want you to pick one new item to put on your salad. Just one. That was the hardest thing for her. I went to green beans first. And then she had peas and green beans, and it took her almost another 6 weeks to add carrots. And I'm talking an intelligent woman. This is not, she was no Joe Schmo. Really intelligent, highly achieved. And I just could not believe it for the life of me. Why is this so difficult for you? So to your point, sometimes for some people, if it's depending on how it registers with you and your support system, like having a coach, networking, it could take an incredible amount of time for that to make an inroad in your life. Whereas somebody else, it's kind of immediate and overnight. Anything else with that? I thought that was really interesting that you mentioned having the network, whether you like it or not, just your experience with it. I'm just also wondering how much you know about that particular issue, and if the issue has anything to do with your overall health or medical capability. I'm just wondering, does that have anything to do with it? Now living in COVID and the fact that we have to wear masks as a protection, will that have anything to do with our cognitive behavior at all?
So are you asking if whether or not we like something can you rephrase your question for me?
Sure. So whether or not it impacts our health from a beneficial standpoint, like this is that life or death reason, where exercise for many people, they don't see it as life or death. It's like either I like it or I don't, and I can go to my plastic surgeon, for some people, or I can eat better as opposed to exercising. So whether it's a health benefit or not, does that have anything to do with it?
So yes and no. So it can, if somebody is really connected to that as a motivating force. However, we also see people smoking through their tracheotomy holes. So clearly not always, right? And so when we do work with clients, we don't start with the behavior. And this is something we'll be talking about in that upcoming webinar, is don't start talking about the behavior that you want your employees to adopt. Start by talking about your values, because human beings are not rational creatures. We are emotional creatures, right? We feel something, and then we almost instantaneously create the logic that justifies that emotion. So if you want to create new logic to justify new behaviors, you have to give a little bit of space for some new emotions or deeper emotions to come up. So when we start our trainings, we spend some time finding out about people. Where are you showing up in the world? Are you a parent or a spouse? Do you have a role in your church or in your community that's really important to you? Where are you showing up, and you want to do a good job with that. And talking about what people value, whether that's financial independence, or it's travel, or spontaneity, or it's creativity, or it's honesty, integrity, kindness. There are no right and wrong answers when we're talking about what people value, but getting them to think about it and express that. And then you can start talking about the behaviors, because now you can draw a line between how this behavior that I want to create impacts everything that I just said was important to me. Mm-hmm. And then I have some motivation to change my behavior. But we're not going to just do it because, the doctor told us to.
Absolutely. Fantastic. This has been really such, a rich conversation. So I haven't opened it up for questions. So let me go ahead and do that. If anyone else has questions that they would like to present to Sharon, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I think there's something want to come in. Yes, there is a webinar next week. Sharon has asked us, it is going to be, we have to confirm the date, but we'll make sure that we push that out to our network. Simone is on the call, and we've got to finalize that. But we're planning to do 2 separate webinars, one for our WeWork community and one for our general community. So we'll make sure that we put that out to you, Sharon. If there's any
sounds great.
Please let us know. I'm going to go ahead and put up a couple of more resources. And before you leave, Sharon, and if there's anyone else on the call, there's a couple of things that we want to share with you all, just so you can see before you leave. So we have a really exciting piece that's going on this summer by Reagan Communications, and we have the pleasure of welcoming Becky Winchell to the call. So Becky, I'm going to unmute you if you haven't already unmuted yourself, and I'm also going to share my screen for this. You guys let me know if you can see this. And let me go ahead and unmute you, Becky. Hopefully you're there.
I'm here.
Okay, fantastic. Can you all see my screen yet? And if you can't, I can just pull up the digital version. Can anyone see the screen?
I can see it.
Okay. I'm going to pull up the digital. And Becky Winchell is actually the manager of strategic communications and PR daily for Reagan Communications. So Becky, welcome to the call. Becky and I got introduced via LinkedIn some time ago, and she has graciously stayed in touch with me. I stayed in touch with her, and I'm actually speaking at this conference this summer, which is called the Social Media and Digital Communications Virtual Conference. Hopefully you all can see that. So Becky, do you want to tell our listeners just a little bit about the conference?
Yeah, I definitely do. I wanted to open it up too. So you both shared such wonderful information. I thought, what better than to share a few more stats and things to think about. It's not based on behaviors, which is fantastic, but it is based on the communication that will help the brand and forwarding some of these behaviors to come. So a couple of things I wanted to share just about the changing landscape of communications, especially during COVID, and how much it's changed social media and digital. Twitter revealed a study that said 64% of consumers think brands should actually be advertising as normal during COVID-19, which is surprising to a lot of both business professionals and communicators, many of whom have definitely backed off on their messages, and some have even gone radio silent. The American Association of Advertising Agencies also shared that 56% of the consumers that they surveyed want to know how brands are helping the community, and 43% find it reassuring to hear from brands during this time. And I think a lot of that has to do from stemming from the feelings of isolation and stemming from working from home and being separated while sheltering in place, and wanting that reassurance and that hope. Edelman shared some really great statistics as well in their updated trust barometer. So they're known for this trust barometer and how it affects businesses across industries. They said that 81% of consumers say they must trust brands to do the right thing, which is huge when we're talking about COVID-19 and masks and being able to relay all those, as we reopen, what brands are doing. So they have to trust brands to do the right thing. And this is a huge, huge part of what they will purchase and doing. And what's interesting about it is doing the right thing, these brands saying that do have showing that they're exceeding this responsibility to ensure that their employees are protected. And that includes all of these reopening procedures. United just came out today with their initiative to clean planes for all of their employees. 63% of employees from Edelman Trust Barometer said that they want their employers to share COVID info daily. But the big thing, and this is what, Fran, you're sharing on your screen right now, is it's so easy to become overwhelmed with these messages as well. And to balance that, one of the speakers that's going to be at this conference is the social media manager at WHO, at World Health Organization. So, a leading expert in this fight against the pandemic, and also against fake news and misinformation as we try to get through this. Not only in being able to present the right information and being able to help people to make it through this with the proper procedures and health and wellness, but also she says the challenge is to keep people's interest in health high when the pandemic passes. That right now they're on the world stage, so to speak, and everybody is paying attention. Pretty much everybody has talked about WHO in the past probably week or so with all the initiatives that they're doing. But how can you keep that interest in health and wellness high? And with that, one of our other speakers from the Trevor Project. So this is a nonprofit. They provide suicide prevention services for LGBTQ youth. Our speaker told me that their call volume within their call centers doubled in March alone. And that is a statistic that they've shared across the board as people are struggling not only just with physical preparedness and being able to keep up. You both shared such wonderful insights about this health and wellness and establishing good habits and routines and being able to establish that authority as well. But then now, especially with reopening and especially as the quarantine has stretched on, so many companies are talking about the mental health of their employees and also the consumers that they want to reach. And it's almost this new, we're starting to call it this mixed turnal, where internal messaging and external messaging are now mixing. And really the best practice here is whether you are a company like Twitter that is going to allow your employees to work from home for a long time or possibly for life, or whether you're establishing reopening and still grappling with crisis messaging, these internal and external messaging and messages and also the content need to match and need to establish a good narrative that is clear and easy to understand. And that's really the purpose behind this. So I'm so excited. This is a great lineup. Fran, I know that you're going to be on this, and this is such a wonderful, you're going to be talking about connecting over just engaging, which is such an exciting thing to talk about. But I just wanted to present the landscape, the changing landscape, and what we're aiming to accomplish with all of these takeaways and experiences.
Fantastic, Becky. That's actually, I haven't had a chance to look through the whole lineup and the agenda. That sounds amazing. And I think you hit on a couple of key issues, is that people may think that, there's so much information out there that people are bombarded and sick of hearing about it. I don't think that's true. I think it's the way in which the funnel of information is coming, making sure the information is congruent and it's specific to you and tailored. And I think Reagan, I've followed Reagan for years. I think Reagan does a really good job at that. But I think that the speaker lineup really denotes the fact that people are still really intrigued and want to know and are very concerned. And so making sure that not just WHO, but all, I guess, different vessels and verticals are sharing the information in a way that people can digest and it's articulated well is so key and important. Anything else you want to share just in reference to other conferences? Because I know that this is not the only one. You all just wrapped up one actually 2 Fridays ago that was a very compelling conference. But anything else you want to share just in reference to content that Reagan puts out?
Yeah, so across all of our events, I mean, I can definitely say, and you'll be sharing a one-pager after this, just a brief just about this. Again, I know I said so much about this, but I mean, we have a variety. So no matter your background here, I mean, we have speakers coming from places like Giphy, Kroger, Amazon Web Services, UCLA Health, American Red Cross, Cisco, TD Bank. So it's really great to hear, it's all of these experiences. Even Steakums is going to be sharing their insights on this agenda. And I think the important thing to realize with all of these agendas, whether it's this conference or any of our others, is that, we really cater, and there's so many communicators across company size, across organizations and industries, and also across departments and roles, that we really try to offer a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences and takeaways. But the key thing across all of our conferences, whether it's this one on June 18th and 19th, or one of our many webinars or virtual conferences that we have coming up, is that we really and have always focused on those actionable takeaways, so that whether you are coming from an entertainment industry or you're coming from a nonprofit with a smaller budget, if you're a team of 500 or a team of 1, that you can realize these lessons learned and then tailor it when you get home, so that it's inspiring and hopeful and useful, instead of just almost jealousy inducing, that it's well, that's nice to have, but how can we do that sort of thing. So that's the thing that we really focus on. And then with everything being virtual, we talked about how, and you both talked about how hard it is to adopt some of these behaviors and keep these behaviors going. But it's also hard sometimes to learn about all of this stuff. So for communicators, sometimes it can be overwhelming. You're sitting in front of the computer all day. Now you go to a virtual conference, it's more sitting in front of the computer. So we're trying to alleviate that in a number of ways. Not only just the actionable takeaways and by our speakers doing show and tells, but also we have virtual networking breaks where you can hop on using your microphone and your camera to actually talk with people on a virtual platform. So that's great. So we're introducing that. We have 2 of them in this conference on both days, 2 different breaks. So you can actually start to connect with people. We provide speakers LinkedIn, Twitter handles, those information in a form afterwards, along with a bevy of bonus materials. The bonus materials might include things like, I know I referenced the Edelman Trust Barometer, so it might include a PDF of that or a similar report. It might include a guide, for example, of a best practice with social media or SEO, or a tip sheet for communicating to a dispersed workplace. And all of these are combined with slides that are shared and an executive summary highlighting some of the key sessions within the conference, so that you don't end up after these 2 days of kind of being, in a good way, being kind of fire hosed with a lot of information, going home and saying, now what do? I can't remember the top points. So you have all those things as reminders as well. And I think that's the big thing that we're trying to do to help everybody to move, because it's a massive amount of information and also a massive job that we're all trying to do during this crisis.
That is phenomenal, Becky. One of the things, and I'm sure this is true of Sharon as well. We both speak nationally at various events, and one of the main, one of the main checkoffs that I have to use in order to decide if I'm going to speak or accept an invitation to speak is the conference, right? Because I'm there, I fly to Orlando, or I fly to LA, or I fly to New York, and I have my 1 hour or my 90 minutes. Then what else? you're kind of stuck. And especially if you're running a company, time is money. I love the virtual platform because we can speak and then immediately get off, we can go back to our work. But even with this, I think that this particular conference and many of the Reagan conferences, the one thing I really like about them is that not only do I provide real, meaningful content as a speaker, but there's other speakers there that I really want to hear. There's other content there that I really want to hear. So hats off to you guys. I think you guys are doing an amazing job. I agree with you completely that there's so much that people are trying to do. And, I was thinking about it this morning as I was preparing for this webinar, and I don't know if you think about it this way, Sharon, or not, but we have done a lot as just moving, thinking human beings since March 15th to completely change the way in which we show up and live. Every other woman I talk to is at Costco and the food store and Trader Joe's and Whole Foods every other day. We shop a lot more than we have to. If you're looking after an aging parent or children, you're multitasking at the nth. Your sleep is probably not that great because you're trying to do all this other stuff, and then you're trying to make sure that economically you've got the right barrier. So from a routine perspective, if you haven't given yourself a pat on the back yet, you need to, because I think all of us, just showing up and realizing I need to be on this call because I need to think about how I'm thinking about how I work going forward is huge. So I think as a people, we've done a phenomenal job. But we can't, catch our breath fast enough because we're going to have to continue to do this job. So first off, I want to say, Sharon, thank you very much for being our guest speaker today. I think you did a phenomenal job of sharing some really incredible tools that people can use now. I wanted to let everyone know before the call ends is that we have a lot of tools that are going to be posted up on our website in the days to come. Hopefully you guys can all see this. So we just launched this new site. I'm so super, super excited. Our team has been working on this for about 60 days, and we have finally relaunched this main page, which is the MindWell Suite. So the MindWell Suite, as I said in the outset of this webinar, is about carefully curated content to support mental, physical, and emotional well-being. And as an expert in the industry over 25 years, I know there's a lot of content out there. I curate content all the time for us to use internally and then for us to use for our clients, and we're paid to do that. So when I say we're carefully curating it, you won't see anything on here that I wouldn't use myself personally. I wouldn't recommend to someone in my family or to a client. So when you come here, you can know that you'll find experts like Sharon, who are time tested. Sharon knows her stuff backwards and forwards. I've been acquainted with her after reading her first book. And since then, we've done work together. So I've worked with her clients, and vice versa. And you'll see other resources on the page on the MindWell Suite. So we're going to put some information up. Sorry, it won't move. We'll be putting some up information. This is a webinar that we recently did, just like we did the webinar today. There's other tools up here. What you'll find in the assets and resources, you'll find all the tools that Sharon spoke about, because she's got an upcoming webinar, right, Sharon, on the face mask, and she's got some other really cool things. We didn't even get to your Habit Mastery app. She has an app, you all, that's amazing, that we're going to be launching into one of our clients. We haven't even had a chance to talk about that, Sharon. The client said yes, so we need to talk about getting that app in. Yes, the app that we talked about in February, that client, yeah, they said yes, so we need to talk about that. So that will all be found in this section here called What's New. Everything that we talked about today in terms of tools and resources, the discount that Becky has provided with the Reagan Communication event in June, just a whole host of things. So I want to, on behalf of Sharon and myself, say thank you to everyone who was able to join us on the call today. Hopefully you all were able to glean something that was helpful and supportive of you when it comes to reopening your office and doing it in a mindful way, in a way that makes sense, that is healthy, safe, and practical. And remember always, mind yourself and your life will be sweet. And with that, I want to say have a great day. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy your day.